So today's gospel follows last week's. Hopefully you have a good memory and remember that Jesus is now in Jerusalem and he's talking to the chief priests and the elders. They're not happy with what he's been doing, and so they challenged him, and last week he told them one parable, and today he tells them another parable, but they seem a little bit confused with all these parables. Or maybe they just weren't well educated. Maybe they were chief priests who never took a course in literature. Maybe, because I think, hello, this is an allegory. But they didn't seem to get allegory. You might remember from your literature classes, like maybe we were studying like Animal Farm or something years ago, which is an allegory where there's somebody in the story who matches up one-on-one or a group one-on-one with some real person. And the Old Testament's full of allegories. You heard one in the first reading today. Only the author, Isaiah, realized that maybe some of those people didn't take the class either. And because he says at the end, the vineyard of the house is Israel. Oh, we're the vineyard, yeah. Mm-hmm. And you didn't produce good grapes. That was the point. Oh, it's about us. I get it. Sometimes you have to be kind of direct. Like you might recall one of the famous allegories in the Old Testament is when David had that little affair with Bathsheba and got her pregnant, and then he calls her husband home and invites him to go spend some time with your wife, and he doesn't want to do that because the rest of the soldiers are still fighting, and so then David sends him off to be in the front lines and die. Nathan shows up, the prophet, and says, I have a story for you. And David says, I love stories. Tell me the story. And he says, well, there was a farmer up in the north who had a lot of sheep. He was very wealthy. And then next door to him lived a guy who had only one sheep. And that sheep was kind of like a pet. And then one day, the rich farmer's friends show up and say, let's have a barbecue. And so you know what he does? He goes and he takes that sheep from that farmer and cooks that. What do you think of that, David? And David said, that makes me so mad. That man will pay for his crime. I can't believe he took the one sheep and it was like a pet. And then Nathan says, allegory. He doesn't say. He says, David, that man is you. And then David, you expect him to be upset, or not sure what we're expecting, but he recognizes it, and he realizes that he needs to change, that he's the sinner, and he seeks God's mercy. He writes Psalm 51, I think it is. If you go through, most Bibles will say, David wrote this psalm when he was in repentance after the prophet Nathan came to him, where he's pleading for God's mercy, saying his sin is always before him. So the chief priests should have gotten it. But they say a really odd thing when Jesus tells the story about these tenant farmers who are running this vineyard that the owner did everything. The owner planted the grapes, put up the wall, built the press. All those tenant farmers had to do was the harvest. Easiest part of the job. And then their share part with the owner. They killed or beat up the messengers. And so finally, he sends his son, and they kill the son. So then Jesus asks the question, what will he do to those tenants? Now, if they were getting allegory, they could have figured out, oh, that's us. We are the tenant farmers. He should treat them nicely. Yes. But they say, he'll put that wicked lot to a wicked end. They condemn themselves because that's who they're talking about. What is that sin of the chief priests and the elders? What is it that they've done? I think we might want to go back to our sociology and psych classes for that. So after you get out of literature, you go down the hall to your psych class, and one of the things you learn is that we as human beings, for ease of thinking and life, tend to group things. We include and exclude. That's just our nature. It makes things easier to say, okay, they're part of the group or they're out of the group. You can look at this over and over and over again, and just in our own lives, how we can feel safe then and secure if we have clear boundaries and know that this person is in or this person is out, or this is safe or this is not safe. It's how we buy our homes. It's how we choose places to work, our friends, and it's everywhere. So the chief priests have a very limited circle. And Jesus is a threat to them. Now, Jesus, as he tells the story, kind of names it when they see the son and they kill the son. Because he says, as he tells the story, that those tenant farmers say, we will get the inheritance. They're not even being subtle about it there. They clearly are self-centered. Because sometimes what happens to that natural thing we do as human beings of excluding and including, when it gets to an extreme, it becomes what the church has always called sin. As St. Augustine defined sin, that it was being curved in on yourself, where me is all that matters. And sin separates us then from God because I'm only looking at me. It's all just me. So the chief priests have come to that point where they're so much in control that they benefit from everything. And that's why they're there to complain anyway to Jesus. Because as you remember last week, Jesus overturned the money changers at the temple. And clearly the chief priests were making money off that. And Jesus had done that. So Jesus is a threat to their little safe kingdom. He says it to them then, because they don't get the allegory. So he says, it's going to be taken away from you, and it'll be given to somebody else. Because Jesus' point is that everybody belongs. The chief priests have excluded and made it their own. But Jesus wants them to see something bigger. That's what the story was about last week. And you get one more story next week, which will repeat that same theme. God's going to give it to people who can yield a harvest, who do respond, who allow God to be in relationship with them. That's God's desire. God created the vineyard. God gives it all. God is generous. He just wants that in return, not to be closed in, not to be isolating, not to withdraw. But probably the most amazing thing Jesus says in response to the chief priests saying they're going to bring that wicked crowd to a wicked end is Jesus says, no, that's not what God is going to do. Haven't you read about the cornerstone and how when it was rejected, the whole building was built around the rejected stone? For Jesus is the rejected stone. And on a cross, he starts building a new kingdom. He changes it all and ends the violence. It is something that the chief priests will never be able to understand. Probably no matter how many classes they take. But it is the good news that in Jesus dying and rising, he creates a new kingdom. One where you and I belong. One where we can yield at great harvest.